As many of you know, this past January I had the privilege and joy to travel with one of Union's travel seminars to Ghana. I could go on for hours about all that I saw and learned in the 2 weeks that I was there with 8 other students, but Johnny Kaplan probably never asked me to come back. One major thing that I did witness while I was there was how freely everybody gave, not just of themselves and their food and their shelter and their time. During our travel around southern Ghana for those 2 weeks, we were provided so much more than food, a bed, and the occasional welcome or parting gift. We were welcomed and hosted by the most wonderful people I have ever met. Today, I might be able to tell you where every picture of the 2000 were taken if I tried really, really hard. But the one thing I can tell you without any effort is about the time and effort from Reverend Kesey as he taught us Ghanaian songs on our hour-long bus rides. Or Mama Lucy and Daniel, who were both overly excited to show us the town of Kumasi and tell us all of their knowledge about this cultural capital of Ghana. Or Victor, Jean-Paul, and Reverend Akiti, who were gracious enough to spend a week with us showing the mission sites and Ho of the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. These people changed my life and the lives of others in our group by merely opening up their lives to God and allowing God to use them to feed and nurture us, not just physically, but spiritually. Sammy, our bus driver, is probably one of the most memorable people we met in Ghana, probably because we spent the most time with him. Sammy had an infectious smile and laugh. He loved to pick up our American sayings as he tried to fit in with us, including the high-pitched voices. He loved telling us all about the food we were eating and assuring us, "Eat it, it's for you." Sammy always knew exactly which turn to take as he drove us all over southern Ghana, never using a GPS, and taught us that the best way to get somewhere is to make sure you stop and ask for directions, at least twice, and if they don't agree, stop again. Sammy was a gracious and amazing person, leaving behind his wife and 2 very young children to spend 2 weeks with us. Over the 2 weeks, we learned all about Ghana through Sammy's eyes, and all about Sammy, the young man who bought a bus as a means to an end, was trying to build a house on land he had already built. And most importantly, Sammy, our best friend and brother, was the young man who completely handed over the reins to God as he agreed to drive a group of 10 crazy Americans around for 2 weeks, a job that's probably a lot harder than any of us could ever imagine. In today's scripture readings, we find 2 very interesting events taking place. First, we heard of Elisha feeding 100 people with only 20 loaves of barley and grain. Then we heard of Jesus and his disciples being presented with the issue of feeding not just a large crowd, but a crowd of 5,000 people. Both events seem next to impossible, yet in both cases they were successful to the point of leftovers, very much like our experience in Ghana. Now, let's take a minute to figure out what that would entail for us here at Starmount. If we were to take on the 5,000 people that Jesus and his disciples fed, first, the upcoming renovation would have to be large enough to make the fellowship hall hold that many people. My guess is that it probably holds about 100 to 150 people right now, so it would have to be about 50 times larger than it already is. And the kitchen would have to be expanded as well. Even at $1 per person for food costs, the fellowship budget would be blown with all the extra expenses. Not to mention, I seriously doubt the session will be ready to accept this challenge. In short, it was not an easy task. So when Jesus asked Philip where the food to feed this crowd was going to come from, I'm sure Philip looked at Jesus like he had lost his mind. Even after he has seen Jesus perform many, many miracles already, Philip is quick to point out just how ridiculous the idea is. Even 6 months' wages would barely cover the cost. Not to mention, my guess is that not many people had 6 months' wages saved up after paying taxes and other monthly bills. How many of you have that much saved? Even in the reading from 2 Kings, we find the servant questioning Elisha as to how we will use such a small amount of food to feed such a large crowd. Finally, Andrew Simon chimes in and points out that a young boy nearby has food. Maybe Andrew Simon is going to pass Jesus' test. But no, he too questions Jesus as to what good this small quantity of food will do. I can only imagine the disappointment and annoyance that Jesus is feeling at this point. It is probably similar to that of the teacher who has showed the student, told the student, and even spelled it out to the student that 2 + 2 is 4. Yet when asked, the student either doesn't know or says the answer is 5. I'm sure Reverend Kesey felt this way as he did his best to teach us correct pronunciations in Ghanaian language of Twi, and we failed miserably. Jesus takes a deep breath and instructs the disciples to have everyone take a seat. He then takes the loaves from the boy, gives thanks and distributes them, and does the same with the fish. Being someone who loves math, I would like to point out that this means 1,000 servings came from each loaf and 2,500 servings from each fish. What's more is there were leftovers. These aren't just two coincidentally similar Bible stories that tell of some miraculous events. There's a point to be gleaned here. God can do a whole lot with only a little. Just like my host in Ghana, who simply gave us their time and made that trip an experience that I will never forget and one that has forever influenced my ministry, we need only provide the little that we have for something incredible to happen. I'm sure that before we arrived in Ghana, and even while we were there, they doubted that they had enough of anything for us. Food, water, housing, the knowledge to answer our many, many questions. However, because they handed the situation over to God, everything fell into place. There's an attitude of this in everything that they do, always committing everything into the hands of God. At first I was caught off guard with the phrase, God willing, since I usually hear it in America when someone has just given up on something. However, there was such joy when Reverend Kesey would tell us plans for the next day, God willing. Of all things that I hold close from those 2 weeks, this attitude is one that has a special place in my life. The attitude of God willing is one that fully recognizes God's actions in one's life. It doesn't matter if you make sure that you have everything you need so that it can be perfect on your end. If we do the best we can with what we have and recognize God's actions in our life and hand control over to God, God will take care of the rest. In today's scripture readings, neither the servant nor the young boy had a clue what could be done with the small amount of food that they had with them. Yet they listened and gave the food anyway. This wasn't just any old food either. My guess is the young boy was on his way home taking dinner to his family. However, by giving away this small amount of food under such vague circumstances, thousands were fed, and my guess is the young boy was probably allowed to take home some of the leftovers. But the servant and the boy both had a God-willing attitude. As I think about this God-willing attitude, I think of the many ministries that we were able to visit while visiting with the Evangelical Presbyterian Church in Ho. One ministry that our seminar group visited and decided to raise money for upon our return was the Dizemi Health Clinic. This is a clinic run by one woman named Rosa and her 2 assistants. They had very little space, no bigger than the narthex just outside of the sanctuary. If I remember correctly, they had only 3 beds for 6 patients that came by, in addition to 2 birthing beds. When we visited, the front waiting hall was packed with people standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting for any assistance that they could get. Some would receive that assistance at the clinic, others would be sent to the hospital hours away. Some of them would add to the almost 500 babies that were born there in 1 year. The Dizemi Clinic is another representation of God taking something so incredibly small and seemingly insignificant and reaching thousands of people. As we stood there and talked to Rosa, looking at the water stains from the leaky roof, she recognized the incredible gift from God, continually expressing that everything they had and needed was purely God willing. I could not help but cry tears of joy when we returned to Richmond, and after a worship service put on by our seminar group, found out that the students, the faculty, and the friends of Union raised $1,500 needed to fix the leaky roof. We've sent the check back to Rosa, and now she will have a much safer place to help every person that walks through the doors. While we were there, we asked Rosa how she stayed open, and she told us that it was a blessing from God. Yes, everything about Rosa and the DeZeming Health Clinic truly reflects God's blessing, as Rosa, just like the young boy and the servant in today's scriptures, gave the little bit that she had, herself, and let God do what was needed. We can't forget those disciples from our New Testament reading, though. When I was learning how to break down the text last year in my New Testament class, one of the questions we were told to ask was, who do you relate to in this text? As much as I hate to admit it, when I asked the question of these two texts, my answer was a mix of both the servant and the disciples. As much as I try to keep that God-willing attitude every day, I doubt and question God much more than I like. I doubted before seminary started, and still do on occasion, that I could even do this ministry thing. I doubted that I would actually be able to go to Ghana, and I continually wonder how God can use someone like me to make a difference. Just as the disciples wondered how such a small amount of food could make a difference, the number of times I have asked God, "Are you sure?" is probably equal to the number of people that were fed on the hill that day. Starmount is a church that I continually look towards for examples of this God-willing attitude. There are so many ministries going on here, making an incredible use of all that the church has, ranging from the prayer shawl ministry to sending members and friends of the congregation all over the world to serve God in a multitude of ways, and working with refugee resettlement here in Greensboro. Starlight has even opened its doors to young seminarians to come learn from John and Catherine as interns, just as Noe did, supporting them through their time at school, and even inviting them to guest preach, even if they've never had a single preaching class. This church has truly given everything over to God so that God might use it in the way that is best. We must not forget this attitude when we go into our personal lives, though. What do you have to offer God? For some of us, maybe we can offer supplies, money, or facilities, while others of us have nothing more than ourselves. The only thing that we need to remember is that we need only recognize God's hand in our life and commit all that we have to God for God's use. And God will make sure that things are done the way they should be. Through all of this, we must understand that while we try to achieve this God-willing attitude every day, God does understand when we doubt. Jesus never scolded or left the disciples behind when they doubted him. He probably simply chuckled to himself and once again showed them yet another way that God worked through him. Yes, he became quite annoyed at times, just as any teacher would, when they feel as if they have done everything and the student still does not get it.